years. Several years ago, we started a program for docents and artists to get together to participate in our tours. And so I've been responsible for coordinating that. And my art is basically, I guess, what I have on. And that's it.
Hi everybody, I'm Lani Emanuel, and this is my second summer exhibiting at the festival and my first summer acting as a docent. Carla saw me doing a critique for Loca, and afterwards she roped me into being a docent, so here I am. And this is my painting.
So, would you like to give us some backstory on the docent program and how it started and what we do?
Happy to. Okay, so the Docent Program started with Monica Dunham, who also started the Raku Firing Program, and Pat Sparkle. And they started it in 1990. And the Festival of Arts has always been a 501c3 public benefit educational institution, and a good part of that takes place with people normally interacting with the artists, with our child artist program, children's art program, and of course with the Pageant of the Masters. But what happened in about 1990, Dee Dee, that's Monica, and Pat started talking more and leading some tours of the show. And our exhibits director, longtime exhibits director at the time, Jack Archer, loved what they were doing and asked them to become regular docents who would then give tours on a regularly scheduled basis. And I got roped into it because occasionally we'd get school groups here, and Kathy Pitts, Jack's assistant, would say, "Can you talk to 40 kids?" And so, and then there was this interesting little event, is that there was a change in structure, and it was the time of the Sherry Butterfield board, which is another topic, and they decided that we were employees and they should wear uniforms. Well, Monica and Pat weren't real thrilled about wearing a uniform, and they said, "We don't need this job enough to wear a uniform." So of course I said Scott Methvin, "We'll wear uniforms if you pay us." So I got a lot of teasing from Pat over that. But I proceeded to do a lot of the tours on the ground, and then overlapped in the time when it became a volunteer activity. I still did the tours for certain groups and was happy to do that. So that's sort of the history of how the program got started. You asked me some questions about why you would want to have a docent tour, and I think that's, institutionally they want to educate the public, but in terms of why, anytime you go to an exhibit, it's always really important to learn more about what it is that you're looking at. And you're always going to be looking at art in a visual, apprehending way. But they're learning things by learning more about the artists, or learning more about the techniques, or learning more about the formal structure of the work is only going to make that a richer experience for you. So I really believe strongly in the docent experience, and I'm so grateful that we have such wonderful volunteers who are so willing to be so generous with their time and get to know the artists, get to know the art, and share that information with the public.
And then, just so everyone knows, we will also have a docent tour right after this event, and Sabra is going to be leading it, so it's going to be awesome. So I hope you guys can join us after this talk for that as well. And then also, just was wondering, all of us do docent tours differently. And so one of the questions that I wanted to make sure that I've had people ask, what do you expect to learn on a docent tour? So maybe we'll, it's because it's a biographical, but then it's also technique. And so maybe talk a little bit, we'll go down and talk about how your docent tour style.
Okay, so my style is, I'm a formalist. And what that means is I taught 2D design, as did Pat Sparkle, for a number of years. And so when I want people to get past the subject matter, and I want people to experience a longer period of looking at a piece of art. That's the big difference between having art in your home, where you can really live with it and the presence of the art, lives with you. And so often when people go to museums, they're like, I've got to see it all, or come to the show, and they don't spend very much time with individual pieces. So when you go on a docent tour and you just look at maybe 6 artists and you get a chance perhaps to meet the artist, to look at the work in depth, that's a really wonderful experience. And for me, letting people have a window into how artists make art and what the considerations that we may not think of when we see the finished product is really important.
My tours are different every single time I give a tour because I like to see who is on my tour. And if they're an artist, they might have special interest on what they'd like to see. And so mine are really different. Something that is really interesting about being a docent here at the Festival of the Arts is that we are included as docents in a lot of the artists' activities and parties and things like that. And that enables us to get to know our artists. And as you get to know them, you can learn some fun facts that maybe they're not realizing that you're learning that you can share on the tour. So sometimes, depending upon the artist, I'll go and it'll be a biographical treatment because I've got a great story. Like, for example, like Sandra Jones Campbell. If you've looked and seen her work, there is a backstory to what she does and why she does it. And so I'll just go ahead and share that with you right now. Sandra her work basically shows a reflection of the way she was brought up. And she is the daughter of an alcoholic father. And every single day that she remembers being a child, her mother would tell her, go get your dad. And so she would go to the bar, the local bar, and she would peer inside, and all these people would be looking back at her. And she wasn't allowed in, and so she would just say, would you please get my dad? Would you please get my dad? And so people were just constantly, who is this? Where's his dad? So she said practically everything she does, if you look at her work, there are these people. They're all involved in an activity. There's a drink somewhere in that picture, and it's the way people were looking back at her as a child. And so, our artists are very interesting people, and usually their work reflects some of that. And so, one other example that I would give you of technique, when I go to Tom Swim's booth, I do technique with Tom because what he does is very interesting for most artists. He ends up using, if you go to his booth today, you'll see, and if Rosemary's there, she'll explain this to you. He uses a different type of base coat for his first base paint. And what he does is, it's not like a white, or it's not like it can sometimes be a bright color. And then he paints over that. And then when you shine light on it, it's completely different. It almost takes on this luminous look to it, and it's unlike any other light I've seen. If you haven't gone over there are these little lights that you can switch, that the docent or Rosemary can switch on and off, and you'll see the difference that his paintings are. They're very different. So for me, it just depends on who is in my tour and what artist I'm looking at as to how I approach the art and how I approach the tour.
This being my first summer doing this, I just sort of winged it. I've been painting for 23 years, so I have, some sense of what I'm looking at, some sense of art history, etc. And I've worked with children in this way before. So I start my tour off, I kind of get to know who I have on my tour, like Carla, do I have any artists, etc. I take them to the children's works, and I choose a wall, say, okay, I want everyone to gather around the 9th grade artwork and really, really look and choose the one that you like the best. And so they do. And then I go around and I have them articulate why they've chosen that particular piece. And this kind of gets them in the mode of responding, looking and responding and understanding within their own bodies what it is that's drawing them to this particular work. So there's that aspect of it. When I take them around to the adult work, I like to stop and visit those artists that are using interesting mediums or interesting processes and have them explain to the group what it is that they're doing and how they came about this and so forth, because there are some things here that I hadn't seen before, and so part of my education as well. And then if there's any anecdotal stories, that kind of goes along with it, because it just, brings them to feel more connected to the artist and more connected to the artist's work if they can connect to the stories that the artist is telling, like you were saying about St. Anne's Campbell. I didn't know that. That's amazing. So it's just kind of like an organic process that I kind of take them through and hit a number of points. I sometimes go to the formal aspects of it, but I find that they're more I think that they really respond to the personal aspect of the artist's work.
And I think it's also nice too, it's like being an artist where I find when I sit in my booth and it's like someone's looking at my work and I want to talk to them about it and I go, hi, and then I must be scary or something or intimidating, and it's like, hi, and they walk away. So it's like so much easier to talk about somebody else's artwork, and it's just nice to be able to, I think with all the online looking at stuff where it's very passive, or you see your feed on Facebook or Instagram or flipping through things, and seeing artwork in person and taking the time to really look, to not just even see the physical image, but what went behind it, like the story of the artist, like with the story of Sandra, it's like, I didn't know that story. And so it's like that just makes it completely different, even though the image itself didn't change. And so one of the things I like to do as being a docent is to share the stories that I know from the other artists from having been here for so many years and getting to know them. And it's like, artists aren't scary, and I think the general public, it's like the idea of like, oh, I don't know much about art, I'll just feel stupid, I don't want to talk about art, and so I think one of the goals of going on a docent tour is opening yourself up to admit, yeah, I don't know everything, and I would like to know. And so I love doing tours with kids because they will ask a question. They do not worry if that's a stupid question. And so I love it even when it's a group of adults where there's like kids on it, because they'll be like, why? And it will challenge me sometimes. So let's see. So also one of the questions I wondered was, what docent tours do you remember going on? Like not even leading, but like at a museum or an event, and why was it important to you, or why do you think it influences you as being a docent?
Well, the experience that came to mind when I saw that question was something LOCA, which is an organization here in town, Laguna Outreach Community Arts, had a forum, and they had a person from a museum on the East Coast who was talking about encouraging people to not be threatened when they look at art. And they said that there is never a bad answer to a question. And I found this to be paired with the thing I learned when I was taking an education class, which is that you never rush in and provide the answer, you wait. It was really, really valuable. And because it empowers people to feel free to say what they think. And you learn so much because people have such wonderful observations. And even when someone says something that is like I had a student once who said Picasso was a French artist. And I said, it's interesting that you think that, because he did a lot of his work while he was in France, but he was really Spanish. And what do you think about it is for him to be an immigrant when he was doing all that important work? So you can take something and turn it into a conversation. And that was one of the best tips I ever learned, and I learned it by going and paying attention.
For me, I started going to museums when I was able to walk. My parents took me to museums, and so they've always been a part of my life. And so I've been on a lot of tours. The ones that I have enjoyed the most were the ones at the Kimball in Dallas and over here at the Norton Simon in Pasadena. And the reason I enjoyed both of those tours, and I go almost every year to both of them, is because they're small enough to be able to give you the history of art all in 1 hour. And that's an important kind of foundational understanding I've used as an artist and also as a docent, because these are such great collections. Both of these museums are just world renowned just for the collections alone, that they have every single important time in history. And so you learn not only what has been happening in the art world since we've began, but you learn why. And you can visually see what is happening. So it's different than taking an art class, because you're able to actually see different parts and see how it all works together within one space. So those two places I would highly recommend, and those are really my favorite type of tour. I really love to understand. I need to be reminded because of the history and how everything fits in. Life makes more sense that way, because art is a commentary on life and what's being experienced at the time. And so that's why I find that so fascinating.
The Norton Simon comes to mind as well when I think of docent tours. And I've spent so much time in that museum, I feel like I pretty much know it intimately. And so that being said, when I travel and I'm going to a museum I've never been before, I try to tag along on a docent tour, because there will usually be an artist or two that I'm unfamiliar with. And when I come across works by an artist I don't know, I pick the brain of the docent and learn as much as I can about them. And I think too, a successful docent talks about the history, talks about maybe the technique and so forth, but I like the gossip. I like to know what the artist was doing. You know, I ask leading questions and so forth to really kind of understand how they were living at that time period, why they were doing what they were doing, just kind of what their life experience was, maybe their love lives, whatever. So, yeah, I'm kind of the pest on a docent tour because I ask so many questions.
Yeah, and my first experience with a docent was not in real life. Probably my favorite docent of all time is Sister Wendy. I don't know if you... So I used to watch a lot of PBS when I was a kid, and when Sister Wendy would come on, she's buck-toothed nun, passed away not too long ago, but I would love how she talked about paintings, because it wasn't dates or now this is how this fits in. She would have the juicy gossip. And it's like, there is nothing funnier than a nun pursing her lips and putting her head down and saying, and it's just so sexual. So it's almost, she was like almost like a stand-up comedian, but about art. And it was very serious, but serious fun. And so that was my experience. Every time it was on, it was like, okay, I gotta watch Sister Wendy. You know, so I hope someday to know as much as she did, because she was a genius, you know, but it's almost like where it's not a cult of personality, but it's like, oh, I wonder what she thinks about this artist, you know. And so I think there are certain docents or people who introduce you to art that will tell you about things that you didn't even know you wanted to know. Let's see, and then another one, we kind of touched in on it about, are you more biographically or focused on technique? But all of us have a background either as artists or in art history. And so it's like I kind of see being a docent as a way of tapping into my bachelor's degree. It's all those classes in art history, and I'm always still learning. And so being part of an active show like this where there are artists creating, it's not like they were in the past, that I have the opportunity to go, hey, how did you do that? You know, so some artists I know more about their technique than the person, and then I've been in the show for 10 years now, which is hard to believe, but it's like there are artists who like I've known my whole adult life, you know, and when people have questions like, well, why did they do that? It's like I didn't have to study. It's just like, oh, I know the answer to that. Let me tell you. So that's just my take. So
and I would just echo that. I was funny. I was talking to an artist today, and we were sharing something, and they said there's this great body of knowledge that each of us has, and it's so great to have something like a festival where you interact with people and you can share that body of knowledge. And it's always so interesting to me because, you know, I think I know so much, and when I talk to artists, I realize I know so little. And it's, you know, and it's fascinating to talk to somebody who's in a different discipline. For, you know, we're so in our society so used to things just being manufactured someplace else and designed by somebody and down the chain. And when you realize that some person has made that gorgeous ring with that beautiful stone, and they have a background in gemology, and they can talk about how they fabricated, cast, developed, designed, and made that thing, and that you have an opportunity to actually talk to the person that made that thing that you may end up buying or appreciating, is just such a unique and wonderful experience that we have here at the Festival of Arts.
Yeah. For me, oh gosh, there's so much I could say about this topic. The techniques that I have learned to identify came because I took drawing classes. And I mean, drawing changed my life because you look at everything completely differently, because you pay attention to things you didn't even really, you took for granted before, about line, shape, negative space. And so I've got to say, what has helped me the most is just taking a drawing class or reading a drawing book, because it just helps in my appreciation for art. So that, I would say, has probably been the best tool I've had, or one of the best tools I've had to help me describe technique, which just comes naturally to both of you guys. For me, I had to learn it later.
Right. So I've worked very, very long and very hard to get where I'm at with my oil painting. And what I love about being here at the Festival of Arts and being a docent is to be able to see the variety of mediums and styles and work, and how each artist is so dedicated to what they're doing that it's really very humbling. And I just don't even know what more I can say about it. The passion and the level of passion that is here amongst the artists for the work that they do, the techniques, the design, the style, their education base, and so forth, it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I can't get enough about, you know, in all my spare time, going around and talking to the various artists and bringing my docent tours to them to hear their story and hear their passion and technique and so forth. And, you know, having gone through a lot of schooling, I have my master's degree from LCAD up the street. The art history aspect of it, I don't know if some of that is dry to my people that I tour, or if it's interesting to them. I don't know. I don't want to get like too much into it and weigh them down with stuff that may not be turning them on. So I think that just the techniques and the personal stories and the passion each artist here has for the type of work that they do, I think is kind of like my wheelhouse as a docent.
Yeah, so we are more of the front grounds of meeting the patrons who come to visit. And so we are here to serve them. And so I always try and study up, and we're lucky because the Docent Program has the new artists who are new each year. We get to meet them months in advance. So we actually have little meet and greets where they present their work and talk to us, so then that way we are then able to talk about the new artists just as well as the artists who we've known for years. And so even that is just a perk of being a docent, where it's like, oh, cool, I get to learn about somebody new, you know? So that's always really fun. Let's see. And so it might be cool to just have like a little analysis, just all of us together maybe talking about a few of these pieces, so you can kind of see what we would talk about on a docent tour if an artist was or wasn't in their booth. Because a lot of the times the artists are here, and then it's easy, because then it's like someone has a question for the artist, here they are, you know. But other times when there's questions and the artist isn't here, then we docents have to kind of pull from our wellspring of knowledge. So would you like to go first, Hedy?
Why don't you tell us about your painting?
Okay, so let's do that, yeah. So we'll each talk about ours, and then, so I'm doing a series of still life. They're kind of trompe-l'oeil, fool the eye. They look silly. My still life paintings are my silly symbolism. So one of my favorite comments that I get from kids is, it looks like a picture. And it's like, yeah, because it amuses me to take something that is silly and not valuable. If you saw those blocks on the floor, you might not even think about picking them up because they're not worth anything. But then I find it amusing as an artist to spend hours rendering it. And then it gives the object value and purpose. And so even that is part of the joke. So I paint puns. So this one's called Don't Forget to Dot Your I's. So that's just me being silly. But that doesn't say anything about my training in formalism or color theory or anything like that. That would be completely separate.
And this is my painting here, and this is also from a series that I've been working on, where I'm interested in abstraction and the landscape and seeing how far I can push a sense of a place without depicting a place. So I'm interested in this tide pool, low water kind of thing, and also interested in just what the color and shapes and the brush strokes are doing across the picture plane, so that the painting exists as its own presence. So my process is probably as completely opposite of Liz's as you possibly could have. I have no, other than that vague idea, I have no concept when I start. And underneath a painting will be a lot of other paintings that probably were perfectly okay to somebody else, but not okay to me. And I just keep painting and painting and painting until the painting starts telling me what it wants me to do, and I try to respond in kind. And when it decides that it has its own life, then I think it's done and successful. So there is no overt goal at the beginning except to discover something along the way.
And this painting, titled She Likes What She Sees, is part of a series that stemmed from my master's thesis. My daughter had just gone off to college. My son was away at college. I was an empty nester. I'm here at LCAT going, what am I going to paint? What's my series going to be? I was missing my daughter terribly and thinking about her transition period between childhood and adulthood. And then I started thinking about my own experience in that time. And having been a fashion designer, how that age group expressed themselves with clothing kind of was of interest to me. So I started with a couple of paintings that were just little 12 by 12s of some legs, girls' legs with mismatched socks and big sister or mom's high-heeled shoes, kind of a little girl transitioning into a woman. And then it became the series of the actual young women. And the way I operate is I find my model. I do a 1-hour photo shoot with her, almost like a fashion photo shoot with wardrobe changes and styling changes and so forth. I direct her somewhat, but then I have her just kind of relax and be who she is. I end up with maybe 400 images, and in there is that one magical image that says exactly who that girl is, and just there's just something about it. It's got the magic. And then I spend 2 to 3 months painting it. And since 2014, I've been working on this series.
So that's kind of how, like, when we talk to people who visit our booths and everything. So what I tend to like not go into with just the average person, just because it does start to go into the art history, and I don't want to like put someone to sleep. But sometimes, like, if someone's doing a docent tour and they do want to know, oh, well, how does this connect, to art history or the greater scheme of art and your influences and stuff? It's like I'll say, oh, well, I love the Dutch still life painters, the idea of painting regular objects super detailed on wood panel. And someone might not know what that is, and then I can tell them about it or share that, So maybe we'll just go down and also say inspirations, or how you kind of would put yourself into not necessarily different eras or time periods, but influences from the past. Sorry, I sprung a new question.
Well, for me, the context of doing something that is, for a lot of people, they have problems dealing with art that doesn't have an overt subject, and they don't know how to look at it, what they should be looking at, and they feel like there's a whole bunch of the shoulds because the art police are going to show up at any time. But I'm painting within a tradition of the last 150, 120 years, which is that there's a linear progression in Western art with the advent of photography of less and less representation and more focus on the two-dimensional canvas surface. And that takes place as early as Gauguin with the simplification of forms, and moves into Cubism and the constantly calling out the verticality and horizontality of the picture plane. And the actual, if you look at late Monet, the actual brushstroke on the canvas signifying not just representing something, but signifying itself as itself. And that then, of course, leads to abstract expressionism and the whole gesture of painting. And postmodern painting is working into incorporating multiple things at the same time. So that's part of the era that we're in right now, which is not only can you make art in any sort of style, but you can mix and match and move low art, which is essentially Warhol did very early, and the Dadists did it earlier still, with high art, and move those things together so that there is no longer that division between low and high art. So I think I find myself, certainly not cutting edge, but addressing those issues.
Okay, my approach would be completely different. This is one of the reasons why I love being an artist. This is probably my favorite reason. I love to get people's opinion in my tour of what they're looking at. And so for all three of these, I would be very excited to know what each of you are thinking about these pieces. It's really, as Liz had mentioned before, it's great when it's children because they're not afraid to say exactly what they're thinking. But I have also found that a lot of adults really enjoy talking about it, talking about what they think, what they're feeling. If they can figure out what Liz is trying to say. Could she have done the same thing but with a different media? Could she have done this, could it have been larger, smaller? We talk about everything, and it's really fun to hear everybody's impression because a lot of art, needs different things to different people. And they would love, I would ask them, what do you think she's thinking? Where do you think she is? Why did the artist draw this? What are you seeing? And the cool thing is like the tennis shoes. Well, But then the dress, oh my word, but then the hat. So what does all that mean? Why did she do that? Why is she dressed that way? So, and then Hedy's, oh my gosh, so much fun. Because a lot of people really don't know exactly what to respond unless they've had a formal art education as to what these things are. But you can see, I mean, you could be so many places with Hedy's piece. You could be at the beach. You could also be just looking up at the sky. You could be in a really green area. You could be, you know, so many places. What, or emotionally, what does this do? Does this speak to you? What is it saying to you? That type of thing. So that's the way I handle a lot of the paintings and work that I encounter on my tours.
What? Oh, can I just say something to pick up on what Carla said? One of the things that I've done in the past is I participated in something called Slow Art Day, and there's a fellow who does, I think his name is Peter, who does something at Laguna Art Museum where it's 1 hour, one painting, where you meditate in front of a painting. And just, and slow art, you look at art with lay people. You don't have experts. They just, it's sort of like a crowdsourcing sort of thing. It's, I think it's the first Saturday in April, and you can go online, Google Slow Art Day, and you'll see museums in your area, and you can just show up and you look at art by yourself quietly for an extended period of time. And all the docent does is choose 5 pieces of art, and then you get together and have a meal together and just talk about what you saw. And it's just fascinating how many people have such different responses to the work, all of which are valid, you know. And I love that. One of the things I do on my tours, because I am this formalist, and I find that people don't feel that intimidated. For example, and I wish we all had microphones so you could do this right now, is that there's 5 elements of design. They're line, shape, value, texture, and color. And you can think of them as sort of being like the alphabet, and then all the poems and all the treatises in the world are sort of made up of those letters of the alphabet. And then there's things like grammar, and that's the principles of order, like repetition and contrast, and things that our artists are manipulating. And when you start looking at art that way, it just, you know, just all apart from the subject, gives people so much to do. Like if I would invite everyone here to just think about how Liz and Lani and I use color. So just take a moment. Let's do 2 minutes to just quietly look at them. Nothing like dead air. Did anybody see? Just a show of hands. Did anyone get a richer experience of the painting from that? Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at Liz's, and I'm looking at the way that the dance of the color and just the arrangements of the colors, and how her colors are fairly saturated or bright against a fairly dark background and tone. And that is, now imagine in your head if she had painted that with a different background. Just if she painted in a stark, white, highly lit background, what kind of emotional resonance would there be? Not only the opportunities for these beautiful reflections and the subtleties of the color and reflections, but just how that one decision informed the whole feeling of the painting. And if you compare that to Lani's painting, which is a what we call, her colors are less saturated, and the colors are, so she's really dealing with kind of it's almost like Whistler's Mother in grays. There's all these beautiful grays and these blue grays and these pink grays and these green grays. And so the painting in and of itself has a feeling just because of how each one of us associates with the color, the feeling of the color. And then there's my painting, which, you know, has this pretty saturated, joyous, color in your face sort of experience. And each way that we're using, so we're using that grammar, of color, the alphabet of color as being one of the elements of design. And then, and I'm not going to do the silent treatment, but think about repetition. Like, that's one of those things that how we construct our artwork. And if you look at Liz's piece, not only is the eye and the gumdrops, not only are they repeated, but they're repeated in a rhythmical and different way. So there's a tremendous play of, like, it's almost like a musical scale, or a little melody riff. Yeah, and perfect when she says that, and changes in height, and just all these lovely little things that when you just go by and say, oh, it's blocks and gumdrops, you don't get as when you spend time with it. And one of the things that is really an odd thing, if I can riff for a while, is projection. Because when Lani chose this particular portrait, she was explaining to me that it was a woman used to...
It was an LCAD student. I had the pleasure of going to Europe on the school tour, and we were on a riverboat in Prague, and it was 100 degrees and probably like 98% humidity. And I said to this young lady, you're the only one that dressed appropriately for how hot it is. Would you be willing to go stand in the middle of the boat and just give me a couple of poses? I took 5 photos of her, and I got 2 beautiful paintings. And yeah, she just was very comfortable in her skin and very comfortable in her clothing. And
the reason I wanted you to tell that story, because now I'm going to do something that is completely what Hedy brings to this painting. Because one of the things that happens is whenever there's a piece of art, there's the art itself, there's all the clues that are in the art, and then there's what the viewer brings. And every viewer is going to bring something different to this painting. It's one of the magical things about painting. But I just thought I'd share with you what I bring to that painting. And when I look at that painting, because there's a certain amount of abstraction, and some of you may go, abstraction? I mean, it's a representational painting of a woman. But look at in the tunnel. Look at how there's these waves of paint. And look at the subtle, there's some wonderful subtlety with the perspective where the floor plane is leading up and the roof plane is leading back, and she's just a little off to one side. But what really, when I think of a tunnel of light, I don't think I'm that off base to say that there's something about her seeming almost like an angel in that outfit. And it's almost like she's a contemporary angel, and her vulnerability of her dress. And it may be something that I'm just bringing up at my point in life to this piece of art. But because it is a piece of art, because it isn't just a illustration, and there's this funny thing that's different between illustration and art. Art has meaning, and illustration depicts. And I really think that this piece makes that transition where all the little bits, not just the subject, but the way it's presented, just as in this painting, captivates and creates a richer experience for us if we're willing to show up and look and think about it.
I want to go on your tour, Hedy. I could learn a lot. Well, I just thought I would open it up for some questions from the audience. Any questions about art, about Docent Program, about anything, because we are here for you to pick our brains. That's what we do.
or observations you
Yes.
made about the paintings. You're
Yes.
up for that too.
Anybody? Okay. So I'm just going to repeat that so you all can hear in the back. So I will do my best to paraphrase, not even a statement. The idea that even when you go to a museum and the docent is talking about an artist you may not particularly like or be interested in, but that it gives you a new appreciation and that it takes you out of your comfort zone. I know I'm paraphrasing wrong, so you know what, I can even pass the mic around to people, but I really like that observation.
I had that experience firsthand where I'd gone to see some African sculpture, and I'd looked at it, and I'd always been a little snot about Renoir, and just didn't like him at all that goopy stuff, and went on a tour and was just transfixed by learning about his work, and so I love that getting outside your comfort zone or learning more about the artists here on the ground.
Talking about getting outside your comfort zone, I will never forget this docent tour that I gave. Many of you know who Nelson Coates is. He's a production designer for movies. He came up to me and said, "Carla, here is my assistant. We have to leave in 15 minutes, and we need to take some paintings with us. So you need to help her find the paintings and the art that we need." And I'm like, in 15 minutes, yeah, please show her, take her on a tour. And it's like 15 minutes, okay. And then to find out, they are looking for the total opposite of what any tour wants. They're looking for something to put in the background. So most of the stuff, it's just like, well, no, that's too stark, that's too bright, that's too tall, that's too small, that's too, and it's like, oh my gosh. And so then I finally figured it out. She was looking for pastel, something light, and something with a directional pull to it. And so it was one of the most strangest tours. I had never looked for a directional pull, and I had never paid attention to like pastels. I mean, this would fit, so it's too bad they're gone. But yeah, I probably would have used this, but that was just one of the strangest and kind of like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what I'm doing. But it did end up working out well, and they did end up with some stuff, and so some of the artists got to have their work considered anyway. So
That's cool. Oh, question in the back. Oh, okay, not a question. Okay. So the comment is she wants to thank all artists who title their work because there's nothing more irritating than having untitled. Yeah, for me as an artist, it's like the titles are part of the play. And it's like, I like it when people come over as a group and they put their hand over the title and they go, guess it. Guess the title. Where it's like a game. And like next year I'm thinking, well, maybe I should have like a little flip thing so that they can't see it and then they have to cheat and peek. Any other comments? Or?
I just thought, something that's unique here for the festival, what we have to show is that we've got 17 different media out there. And I mean, that you're not going to find that even in most museums. So that's a real plus. And plus, I mean, it's outside, and I think the way that it's a more casual atmosphere. I think sometimes museums can appear to be a little bit more structured and a little bit more formal. Where here, you get to enjoy it in a more formal atmosphere, and I think that that's a real plus to the Festival of the Arts and the way they've designed this our new facility. It's fabulous. And then also Art to Go. Were you going to mention Art to Go? Okay? I'll let her do Art to Go.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, because then there's also the artists helping artists as well. So it's like there's the Art to Go program for the Artist Fund, where it's like you can buy a piece of original work and it's going to help, again, the artist community, that goes to the, and it really is like a summer camp, where we all show up and talk about what we've been doing in the year. And then as the summer winds down, it's like, I gotta go home, and so it really is a great place. And so I just want to thank you all for coming to our art talk, where we're talking about art and art talking. So
And I wanted to mention also, come to our media center and do some art, our art center at the over here by the food. We'd love to have you. We've got free art projects that you can do, and I think you'd really enjoy them. And also our tour, which is at 2 o'clock.
Yeah,
right?
or I think today we're going to start it at 2:10 to give you all an opportunity, if you do want to go on the tour, to grab some more tea before you leave. And Sabre will be leading that tour. And so again, I want to thank PBS SoCal for sponsoring the lovely tea, and hope to see you here next week at 1 o'clock, where the topic will be artists who teach. So you'll get to hear about the teacher's perspective from artists here. So thank you very much.